I've been thinking about visibility lately, not the kind that comes from being seen, but the kind that comes from being understood without explanation. That's what I was hoping for when I reserved the Meridian room for my father's 65th birthday. I wanted to give him something beautiful, something that honored the precision he'd always valued, the way he could look at a bridge or a building and understand the mathematics of grace. I didn't expect the evening to become an inventory of everything my family had decided I wasn't. The restaurant occupied the entire top floor of a glass tower in the financial district, and when I arrived early to check the arrangements, the city spread below like a circuit board of light. The Golden Gate Bridge hung suspended in fog to the west, its cables disappearing into mist, and I stood at the window thinking about structural integrity, about what holds things up when you can't see the full framework. The private dining suite I'd reserved faced the bridge directly, floor-to-ceiling windows, custom floral installation designed to echo the geometric patterns of suspension cables, a menu I'd worked with the chef to personalize around my father's preferences. The sommelier had selected wines that progressed like a conversation, each one revealing something the previous vintage had only hinted at. I'd wanted it to be perfect. Not because perfection meant anything on its own, but because my father had spent his career measuring tolerances down to fractions of millimeters, and I thought he might appreciate the same attention in a different medium. I work in experiences the way he worked in steel and concrete, building something that holds weight you can't always quantify. My family arrived together, which wasn't unusual. Vanessa and Mark lived in Morin, my parents in their longtime home in Walnut Creek, and Ethan had recently moved to a new high-rise in Somer that he described in detail over our last family dinner: square footage, amenities, the building's LED certification. They came through the entrance in a cluster of wool coats and familiar voices, and I watched their faces change as the host led them through the main dining room toward our private suite. Vanessa's expression went carefully neutral. My mother's hand moved to her collarbone, a gesture I recognized from childhood, something she did when recalculating a situation. "Avery," my father said, and his voice carried the particular tone of pleasant confusion. "This is quite something." "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, and hugged him. He smelled like the same aftershave he'd worn my entire life, something woody and old-fashioned that I associated with weekend mornings and the sound of coffee brewing. "The Meridian room," Vanessa said, and I heard the capital letters in her pronunciation, the way she said it like citing legal precedent. "I tried to get a reservation here for a client dinner last month. They were booked 8 weeks out. I planned ahead," I said. My mother kissed my cheek and held my shoulders, studying my face the way she used to check for fever when I was young. "Sweetheart, this is lovely, but it's so extravagant. You didn't need to." "I wanted to," I said. "It's not every day to turn 65. We settled into our seats, and I watched them take in the details I'd spent weeks coordinating: the lighting that shifted imperceptibly as the sun set, the table setting that referenced nautical navigation charts as a nod to my father's early career in maritime infrastructure, the small leather-bound menu cards printed with each guest's name. The host poured champagne, something elegant and precise, and I raised my glass. "To Dad," I said. "For teaching me that the invisible parts of a structure matter just as much as what people see." Here, Ethan said, but he was looking around the room with the assessing expression he developed since business school, like he was calculating cost per square foot. Dinner began, and with it, the familiar choreography of family conversation. Vanessa talked about a merger she was negotiating, her voice carrying the controlled enthusiasm of someone who'd learned to make ambition sound like obligation. Mark added commentary in the shorthand of shared professional language, terms like a due diligence and a synergy realization that I recognized from proposals my own company fielded regularly. Ethan discussed his role at a VC-backed startup, dropping names of founders and investors with the careful casualness of someone building a personal mythology. My mother asked me how I was doing, and I said I was well, that work was busy. "Still doing the event planning?" Ethan asked, And the phrase landed like it always did. Diminutive, recreational, something adjacent to real work. Still designing experiences, I said. Right, he said. How's that market? I imagine it's pretty saturated. Everyone with a Pinterest account thinks they're an event planner now. Vanessa laughed, not unkindly. Ethan, don't be dismissive. Avery's doing what she loves. That matters more than market saturation. The words were generous, but the undertone wasn't. I heard the implicit hierarchy. My sister had chosen security, prestige, partnership track at a firm whose name opened doors. I had chosen passion, which was lovely but ultimately decorative, something you did when you could afford not to prioritize stability. The first course arrived, local halibut with compressed melon and edible flowers arranged like watercolor. My father examined his plate with genuine interest, the way he approached any kind of craftsmanship. The precision here is remarkable, he said. Look at the knife work on this fish. They have 3 Michelin stars, I said. The chef trained in Copenhagen. 3 stars, and my mother repeated, and I watched her do the mental arithmetic I knew was coming. Avery, this must cost. I mean, we should split this. Vanessa, we should split this with Avery. Mom, it's handled, I said. It's Dad's birthday. But honey, this isn't practical. You should be saving for something permanent, building equity. These kinds of experiences, they're wonderful, but they don't compound. Ethan finished. From a wealth-building perspective, the ROI on experimental spending is basically zero. You're looking at $500-600 per person here. That's 8% annual return over 10 years if invested properly. Vanessa reached over and squeezed my hand. We just want you to be secure, she said. You know we support your choices, but we also want you thinking about the future. You're 34 now. It's not too late to consider something more stable. I could introduce you to people at my firm, in operations maybe, or client services. You have transferable skills. I looked at her hand on mine, her engagement ring catching light, the diamond Mark had selected after consulting with her about cut and clarity, approaching romance like a research project. My sister meant well. They all meant well. That was what made it so difficult to articulate the slow erosion of being loved within a framework of assumptions. I appreciate that, I said. I'm doing okay, though. Are you? My mother asked, and her concern was genuine. Because you don't talk about work very much, and you're always so vague about details. We worry that maybe things aren't going as well as you'd like, and you're too proud to say something. Your mother has a point, and my father said. If you need help, Avery, if you're overextended, we can. I'm not overextended, I said. Mark gestured at the room, at the elaborate table setting and the bridge glowing orange in the distance. This suggests otherwise, he said, not unkindly. Look, we've all been there. When Vanessa and I were first married, we definitely spent beyond our means a few times trying to keep up appearances. It's easy to do in the Bay Area. But you've got to be strategic about where your money goes. The second course arrived, and with it a wine I'd selected specifically for its story, a Burgundy from a small family vineyard that had been replanting their land according to sustainable principles, thinking in generations. The sommelier described its provenance, and Ethan nodded appreciatively while simultaneously Googling it under the table. I saw his eyes widen slightly at the price. Jesus, Avery, he said quietly. This is a $400 bottle. It's a special occasion, I said. Conversation shifted to safer topics, my parents' upcoming anniversary, a trip Vanessa and Mark were planning to Japan, Ethan's thoughts on the IPO market. I listened and responded, performing the version of myself they found most comfortable, appreciative of advice, a little naive about financial realities, still figuring things out. It was a role I'd settled into gradually, not through any single decision but through the accumulated weight of small moments like this, where enthusiasm about my work was met with concern, where success markers that didn't fit corporate frameworks were gently redirected toward a more sustainable paths. Between the third and fourth courses, I excused myself to check on the dessert I'd arranged, a custom creation that referenced my father's first major project, a pedestrian bridge he designed for a state park, rendered in chocolate and spun sugar. The pastry chef wanted to confirm timing, and I followed the host through the main dining room toward the kitchen corridor. That's when I heard them. The acoustics in the Meridian room were unusual. Something about the glass walls and the open floor plan created pockets where sound carried unexpectedly. I'd noticed it earlier when testing the space. Now, standing near the corridor entrance, I could hear my family's voices from our private suite, the conversation they were having in my absence. "She's trying so hard," Vanessa said, and her tone was fond, almost maternal. "This whole evening, it's like she's trying to prove something." "Prove what?" my mother asked. "That she's doing fine. That her choices are working out. But look at this, it's performance. She lives in Oakland, she drives a 10-year-old car, and she's dropping what, $6,000 on a dinner? The math doesn't work." "Maybe she's seeing someone," my mother said. "Someone with money who's helping her." "That would be worse," Vanessa said. "That would mean she's letting someone else fund her lifestyle to keep up appearances." Ethan's voice cut in. "I make 6 figures and I wouldn't light money on fire like this. It's financially irresponsible. Someone should talk to her about basic investment principles." "Don't be harsh," my father said, and his defense of me should have felt better than it did. "Your sister has different priorities. Not everyone measures success the same way." "But success is measurable," Ethan said. "That's literally what metrics are for. Revenue, equity, assets, growth trajectory, these aren't subjective. And by any objective standard, Avery is underperforming her potential. She's smart, she's organized, she's creative. She could be doing so much more if she'd just approach her career strategically." "She seems happy," my father said, but he sounded uncertain. "Happiness isn't a retirement plan," Mark said. "Look, I like Avery. She's probably the most genuinely kind person in this family. But kindness doesn't build wealth. At some point, she's going to need to get serious about her financial future, and the longer she waits, the harder it gets. The compound interest she's losing every year she doesn't maximize earnings, that's opportunity cost she'll never recover." I stood very still. The pastry chef was waiting for me somewhere beyond the corridor, and I knew I should move, should continue forward and focus on the dessert timing, but something held me fixed. I'd heard versions of this conversation before, gentler, more carefully worded, delivered with concern rather than casual assessment. But this was different. This was the unguarded version, the truth of how they saw me when I wasn't performing competence for them. Not cruel. Not malicious. Just fundamentally certain that they understood my life better than I did. "She's always been like this," Vanessa said. "Remember when she wanted to major in theater? We talked her into business administration because we didn't want her to struggle. And then she struggled anyway because she tried to do the creative thing instead of leveraging her degree properly. Maybe we should have let her do theater," my mother said softly. "And have her waiting tables at 40? Vanessa's voice was firm. "No. We were right to push her towards something practical. We just didn't push hard enough. She needs structure, accountability, maybe even therapy to figure out why she's so resistant to building a stable career." I turned and walked back to our table. They looked up, smiling, Conversation shifting seamlessly to the view, to the bridge, to anything but their assessment of my failures. The rest of dinner proceeded like a performance where I'd forgotten I was acting. Courses arrived with impeccable timing, each one more elaborate than the last. The pastry chef outdid himself with the dessert, and my father actually stood up to photograph the chocolate bridge from multiple angles, marveling at the engineering. But I moved through a distanced, watching myself smile and deflect and accept their casual advice about financial planning and networking and maybe, really, considering something more serious than event planning. When the bill arrived, Vanessa reached for it immediately. "Let's split this," she said. 5 ways, it's manageable for everyone. "Or I can expense it," Mark said. "If we frame it as a client development dinner." "That's fraud," Ethan said cheerfully. "But I appreciate the creative accounting." "Avery," my mother said gently, "let us help. This was a beautiful gesture, but you've done enough." Vanessa was already pulling out her corporate card, her expression kind and slightly pitying. "Seriously, let's just divide it. I don't want you stressing about this." I placed my credit card on the table. American Express Centurion. Black card, understated, the weight of it satisfying in a way I'd never quite examined. The table went quiet. "Is that?" Ethan started. "It's a black card," Mark said, and his tone had shifted to something I'd never heard directed at me before, respect competing with confusion. "Those are invitation only," Vanessa said slowly. "You can't apply for them. And I think the spending requirement is $250,000 annually," Mark finished. "Minimum." The server took my card without comment, and the silence stretched while we waited. I could see them trying to recalibrate, to fit this information into their existing understanding of who I was. My mother looked worried, like perhaps I'd gotten involved in something illegal. Ethan was openly Googling requirements for Centurion cards. Vanessa was very still, lawyer mode engaged, gathering information before committing to a position. When the server returned, she wasn't alone. The general manager followed, a woman in her 50s with the particular poise of someone who'd spent decades reading rooms and adjusting accordingly. "Ms. Bennett," she said, and her warmth was professional but genuine. "I didn't realize you were dining with us this evening. If I'd known, I would have arranged something special." Everyone was looking at me. I could feel the weight of their attention, the questions forming. "Thank you," I said. "Everything was perfect." "I'm so glad. We're still talking about the Salesforce Global Summit last year. The way you transformed the Moscone Center was absolutely breathtaking. And the Smomer Gala in November? I attended as a guest, and I've never seen anything like it. The installation in the atrium, the way you integrated the permanent collection into the event design, it was brilliant." "That's very kind," I said. She turned to my family, including them in her enthusiasm. "Your sister is a legend in the industry. We had the governor here for a private donor dinner last month, and his chief of staff said Bennett Collective was the only firm they trust for the inaugural gala. The attention to detail, the way she creates environments that actually transform how people experience a space, it's extraordinary." She excused herself, but not before instructing the server to bring a bottle of Krug, compliments of the house, and the vintage she selected was something I happened to know retailed for about $800. Vanessa was staring at me. "Bennett Collective," she said. "You own Bennett Collective?" I nodded. "How long have you? When did you?" As she stopped, reorganizing her questions. "You're the founder? You're the CEO?" 5 years, I said. "We started in a warehouse space in Dogpatch. Now we have offices here and in New York." Ethan had his phone out, scrolling rapidly. "Holy shit," he said. You produced the Oracle Open World keynote. You designed the Google I/O afterparty. Avery, these are major contracts. The budgets for these have to be significant, EI said. How significant? He asked. Like, what are we talking? Annual revenue? Projected 78 million this year, EI said. We're on track for 90 next year. The Krug arrived. No one moved to drink it. My father was looking at me like he was seeing something he'd missed, like finding a load-bearing wall he hadn't accounted for in his calculations. 78 million, he said. You have $78 million? Revenue, I clarified. Not personal. The company generates that. My personal net worth is around 43 million, but that's mostly equity and assets. Liquid is different. $43 million, and my mother repeated, and she said it the way you'd say a time travel or a perpetual motion machine, like a concept that couldn't be real. Mark was laughing, but it sounded strange, almost helpless. You let me give you advice about strategic spending, he said. Jesus Christ, Avery. I gave you advice about opportunity cost, and you have $43 million. Why didn't you tell us? Vanessa asked, and her voice had gone very quiet. Why would you let us think? Why would you let us believe you were struggling? I looked at her, at all of them, these people I'd loved my entire life, who'd shaped me and supported me and somehow never quite seen me. Because every time I mentioned progress, you suggested I get something stable. Every time I talked about a project I was excited about, someone offered to introduce me to HR contacts. When I said I was starting my own company, you asked about my backup plan. That's because we were worried, and my mother said, we wanted you to be safe. I know, EI said. But safe to you meant corporate. It meant hierarchy and titles and a framework you understood. And when I didn't fit that framework, you decided I wasn't succeeding. You decided I needed help, needed guidance, needed rescue from my own choices. That's not fair, Vanessa said. We were supportive. You were supportive of who you thought I should be, EI said. Which is different from supporting who I actually am. Ethan was still scrolling through his phone, pulling up articles, press releases, industry awards. West Coast Experimental Architect of the Year, he read. Profile in Forbes. Speaking engagement at South by Southwest. Avery, you're famous. In your industry, you're actually famous, and we had no idea. Because I didn't tell you, EI said. I made that choice. Not because I was hiding success. I don't think success is something that needs to be hidden. But because I was protecting something else. I was protecting the ability to be loved without status distorting everything. My father reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was rough, calloused from decades of work, and the familiar texture of it made something crack open in my chest. Tell me why, he said. Not because I don't believe you. I do. But help me understand why you thought you needed protection from us. I looked at him, at his face I'd known longer than any other, and tried to find words for something I'd never articulated clearly even to myself. Because family roles calcify, EI said. Vanessa is the successful one, brilliant, driven, partner track. Ethan is the ambitious one, strategic, connected, always optimizing. And I was the creative one, which in our family meant impractical. It meant someone to worry about. And once those roles set, they became self-reinforcing. Every conversation confirmed them. Every piece of advice assumed them. That's not, Vanessa started, then stopped. Okay. Maybe. Maybe we did that. I didn't want to become the successful one, EI said. I didn't want my relationship with you to reorganize around money or achievement or whatever metric we used to measure worth. I wanted to stay Avery. I wanted you to love me without recalculating. My mother was crying, quiet tears that she didn't wipe away. We do love you, she said. Of course we love you. I know, EI said. But love looks different when it's filtered through assumption. When you thought I was struggling, your love was protective, careful, a little pitying. I didn't want to find out what it looked like when you knew I was successful. I didn't want to risk it changing into something transactional. The champagne sat untouched, going slowly flat. Outside, the bridge lights reflected on the bay, and fog was rolling in from the ocean, obscuring the towers of the city in layers of white and grey. I saw your first building, Dad, EI said, and he looked up, startled by the shift. Your pedestrian bridge in Mount Dearlow State Park. I was 7, and you drove us all out there the day it opened. You walked us across it, and you explained how you'd calculated the load, how you designed the handrails to be exactly the right height for safety without obstructing the view. You said the invisible work was what mattered, the foundation, the anchoring, the stress distribution. You said anyone could make something that looked good from a distance, but making something that held weight required understanding forces most people never thought about. I remember, he said. That's what I do, EI said. I build experiences that hold weight. Events that carry meaning, that create transformation, that honor what matters to people in moments that deserve more than generic execution. And it's not construction, and it doesn't produce quarterly reports that make sense to you, but it's the same principle. Understanding invisible forces. Designing for stresses people don't articulate. Building something that supports more than you can see. He nodded slowly, and I watched understanding move across his face, the engineer in him recognizing methodology even in an unfamiliar field. Vanessa was quiet for a long time before she spoke. I helped negotiate contracts for tech companies that you probably designed events for, she said. And I never knew. I sat in meetings where people mentioned Bennett Collective, and I had no idea that was you. She laughed, but it sounded painful. I offered to help you find stable work while you were designing events for companies I can't even get meetings with. You were trying to help, EI said. I was being condescending, she said. Christ, Avery. I was so condescending. We all were. You were operating from what you knew, EI said. From what I let you know. Don't, Ethan said, and his voice was sharp. Don't make this easier for us. You kept quiet because we made you feel like you needed to, and that's on us. We assumed failure instead of asking questions. We offered solutions instead of listening. And you dealt with it by just, quietly building an empire while we patted you on the head and suggested informational interviews. The server returned to clear plates, and the momentary interruption gave us all space to breathe. When she left, Mark spoke for the first time since the manager had left. I don't know how to recalibrate this, he said. I don't know how to go back to family dinners and not feel like an ass every time I remember giving you financial advice. Then don't go back, EI said. Go forward. Different advice, different questions, different assumptions. Like what? My mother asked. Like asking about my work because you're interested, not because you're worried. Like assuming competence instead of concern. Like trusting that if I need help, I'll ask for it, and that silence doesn't mean struggle. Sometimes it just means privacy. We drank the Krug eventually, and the conversation shifted into something more careful, more curious. They asked about the company, real questions, not diagnostic ones. How did I source talent? What was my client acquisition strategy? How did I manage creative vision with operational logistics? Ethan wanted to know about my tech stack. Vanessa asked about legal structure and liability insurance. My father asked whether I'd ever considered writing about my methodology, and we talked for 20 minutes about documentation and craft. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was different. Real in a way our conversations hadn't been for years. We left the Meridian room after midnight, and I stood with my father on the sidewalk while we waited for cars. The city was quiet, that particular 2 a.m. stillness where even San Francisco feels contemplative. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I should have been saying that all along, but I'm saying it now. What you've built, Avery, it's extraordinary." "Thank you," I said. "But I'm also sorry," he said. "For making you feel like you needed to hide it. For not asking better questions. For assuming I knew what your life looked like without doing the work to actually see it." I leaned against his shoulder, and he put his arm around me, and we stood like that for a while, watching fog transform the city into something soft-edged and uncertain. The weeks that followed were strange. My mother called more, and the conversations were different. Less checking in, more actual dialogue. Vanessa sent me a client referral with a note that said, "They need someone exceptional, so I thought of you." Ethan asked if he could shadow my team for a day, learn about operations in a creative company, and I said yes, even though it meant exposing him to the full scope of what we did. My parents' 40th anniversary was coming up in a month, and my mother mentioned maybe doing something simple, just family, nothing elaborate. I didn't argue. I just started planning. I chose a venue that meant something, the Flood Mansion, a Beaux-Arts landmark in Pacific Heights that had been restored to its original elegance. Intimate guest list, just our family and my parents' closest friends, maybe 40 people total. I worked with a florist who understood how to honor longevity without making it feel memorial. I commissioned a video that wove together 40 years of photographs into something that felt like memory itself, not linear, but layered, images bleeding into each other the way one year becomes another. The night of the party, I arrived early to check final details. The mansion glowed against the evening sky, warm light spilling from tall windows, and I walked through rooms making tiny adjustments that no one but me would notice. The angle of a floral arrangement, the spacing of chairs, the timing of when staff would begin parsing champagne. My family arrived together again, but this time, the dynamic was different. Vanessa found me in the gallery where we'd set up the video installation and just stood there, watching decades of our family history play across 3 screens. "This is beautiful," she said. "Not just pretty, actually beautiful. Meaningful." "That's the goal," I said. She turned to look at me, and her expression was complicated, pride and regret and something like wonder. "I spent years thinking I was the successful sibling," she said. "And you were out here building something I didn't have the imagination to even conceive of. That's humbling." "Success isn't competitive," I said. "I know. But I made it competitive. I made everything competitive, including our relationship, and I'm sorry for that." Ethan found us before I could respond, and he was excited in a way I hadn't seen from him before, not performing enthusiasm but genuinely energized. "The spatial design here is incredible," he said. "The way you're using the architecture to guide people through emotional progression, cocktails in the bright, open conservatory, dinner in the intimate wood-paneled library, dancing back in the conservatory but transformed with lighting so it feels like a different space. It's like narrative structure but physical." "That's exactly what it is," I said. My father gave a speech during dinner, and he talked about 40 years of marriage as a form of engineering, building something strong enough to hold weight, flexible enough to adapt to stresses you couldn't predict, beautiful enough to make the work worthwhile. He looked at my mother with the kind of love that survives decades of ordinary life, and then he looked at me. "Our daughter Avery designed this evening," he said, And I'm understanding now that what she does isn't just event planning. It's architecture. Emotional architecture. She builds environments where meaning can happen, where people can experience something together that they'll carry forward. That's a rare gift, and I'm grateful she used it for us. People applauded, and I caught my mother's eye across the room. She was crying again, but this time it felt different, not loss but recognition. We danced in the conservatory after dinner, the room transformed by lighting that made it feel like we were suspended in amber, and Vanessa pulled me aside between songs. I want to do better, as she said. I want to be a sister who sees you clearly. But I don't know how to undo years of assumptions. How do I relearn how to talk to you? Ask questions, I said. Real ones. Not diagnostic. And trust the answers. Okay, she said. Starting now. Are you happy? The question surprised me with its simplicity, its directness. Yes, I said. I built something that matters to me, and I get to do work I love with people I respect. I'm happy. Good, she said. I'm glad. And I'm sorry I didn't ask that before. The party wound down near midnight, and I helped coordinate departure logistics, cars called, coats retrieved, the careful choreography of ending an evening gracefully. My parents were the last to leave, and my father held my face in his hands the way he used to when I was small. Thank you, he said. For this. For everything. For being patient with us while we figured out how to see you. You're still figuring it out, I said. We all are. That's okay. I drove home to Pacific Heights, to the penthouse I'd bought 2 years ago and furnished slowly, carefully, with pieces that meant something. It occupied the top floor of a renovated Victorian, with original hardwood floors and crown molding and windows that overlooked the bay. I'd never mentioned it to my family, not out of secrecy but because it hadn't felt relevant to who I was in relation to them. Now, walking through rooms full of art I'd collected and furniture I'd chosen and light that fell across everything in patterns that changed with the time of day, I thought about visibility again. About the difference between being seen and being understood. My phone buzzed. Group text from Vanessa. Is Sunday dinner at our place? Nothing fancy. Just family. Ethan is apparently attempting to cook. Ethan's response. I'm catering from that Vietnamese place. I'm ambitious but not delusional. My mother. It sounds perfect. Avery? I looked around my living room, at the shelf where I'd recently added family photographs next to my industry awards, both parts of the same story now, no longer separated. The penthouse was quiet, the city spread below in patterns of light that looked almost intentional, and I felt the particular satisfaction of being exactly where I'd built myself to be. I'll be there, I typed. I made coffee in the morning and stood at the window watching fog burn off the bay, revealing the bridge piece by piece. Somewhere across the water, my family was waking up too, probably already texting about dinner plans, about who would bring what, about the ordinary logistics of gathering together. They knew now what I built, what I was capable of, the full scope of what my life looked like beyond their assumptions. And that knowledge had shifted something, not fixed everything, not erased years of conditional perception, but created space for different possibilities. The phone buzzed again. My father, one-on-one message. I've been thinking about your event design methodology. Would love to hear more about how you conceptualize spatial narrative. Coffee this week? I smiled. Real questions. Actual curiosity. The beginning of being known. Success didn't change me. It never had. What changed was their willingness to see beyond the narrative they'd written for me, to ask questions instead of assuming answers, to recognize that different didn't mean wrong and unconventional didn't mean unstable. I'd spent 5 years protecting my sense of self from the distortion that comes with being perceived through the lens of achievement. I'd chosen privacy over validation, chosen to be loved for who I was rather than what I'd accomplished. It had been lonely sometimes, keeping those worlds separate, maintaining a version of myself that felt authentic while hiding the evidence of what that authenticity had built. But now, standing in my home full of light and air and the accumulated choices of someone who'd built exactly the life she wanted, I didn't feel lonely. I felt complete. Known. Finally visible in all the ways that mattered. Outside, the city was waking up. My calendar showed meetings, site visits, a proposal deadline for a museum fundraiser that could define the next phase of Bennett Collective's growth. Real work, complex work, work that mattered. And on Sunday, dinner with my family. No performance. No translation. Just the possibility of being seen clearly and loved completely, not despite who I was, but because of it. I finished my coffee and opened my laptop. There was so much to build, so many spaces to transform, so many moments to design that would hold more weight than anyone watching could see. The invisible work. The foundation. The forces that actually held things together. My father would understand that now. They all would, eventually. And that felt like its own kind of success, quieter than revenue numbers, more durable than awards, the kind of achievement you measure in recalibrated relationships and questions asked with genuine curiosity and family dinners that feel like homecoming instead of performance. I started reviewing the proposal, and sunlight moved across my desk in the particular way it did on Friday mornings, and the city hummed below, and everything felt exactly as it should, solid, intentional, built to hold the weight of a life that finally didn't need to be explained. Just lived. Just this. Just enough.